Okay, then, Paul. So you're on a desert island, and you can have 5 classic Doctor Who DVDs with you. 5 of your favourite stories from the classic era. Which 5 would you choose?
In reverse order, presumably. I'd kick off, I think, with might seem like an odd choice, but it's a story I have very fond memories of. It's the Sea Devils from 1972, John Pertwee. And Joe Grant versus the Masters versus the Master and the Sea Devils out at sea near Portsmouth or Plymouth or wherever it was. I just love that story. The scale of it, the fact that it's a story that doesn't involve unit. I think the Sea Devils, okay, you look at them today and you think, well, they're just string vests and things, but there's something about that story which it was one of the ones that was repeated quite a lot in the 70s, so it stayed with me quite a lot. But I just think it's a really nice action adventure story. Obviously, it's a replay of the idea of the Silurians with this race that wants its planet back. But I just think it's done so well. It's John Pertwee at his best. I've come to the conclusion that probably John Pertwee is my favourite of the classic Doctors, because I don't think that across his run they really dropped the ball at all. I think his last season tails off a little bit. But I think by the time we get to the Sea Devils, he is so full of that role, that character. He just, he blazes off the screen. And I just think it's a terrific adventure story, and there's so much spectacle in it, and there's so much intrigue, and it's a really nice, clever plot, and it's one I can watch anytime. And if I'm on an island, I'm going to watch something that's got the sea in it.
As a kid, I started watching it sort of halfway through the Tom Baker era, and I would hear about the Sea Devils from older lads who remembered it, and it became like this mythical episode. And you'd read the Target book, and you'd imagine it all in your head, And of course, one of the best things about that as well is Roger Delgado.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, what a combination those two were together, just electrifying. And I love that sword fight they have at the end of part 3, I think it is, or part 4. It's just great adventure stuff, and it's the show in its prime, I think, really. Much as I love Tom Baker's era, I think that those particular years for John Pertwee, and that sort of story was just so imaginative and so colourful, and you could see why it was so popular, because it wasn't trying to be too clever. It was just a good adventure story with an old enemy. The Master was firmly embedded in the series by now. The show was confident enough to leave Unit behind and let the Doctor and Joe go off and do someone else. It just seemed it could do anything at that point. And I just think, it's not the most complicated, perplexing story of the series, but I just think it's a good adventure, and I think that sometimes that's enough.
And did we ever find out why they needed the string vests?
Probably to stop them being naked on screen, I would imagine. I think that was actually the thing from the director, wasn't it? That the string vests were a last-minute addition, because he said you can't have these things who are apparently naked, you've got to put something on them. So they just came up with these string vests and bung them on. I think I read that somewhere. I don't think it was an aesthetic thing for the Sea Devils themselves.
And in a decade's time, of course, they would swap them for samurai costumes.
Yeah, let's not go there, shall we?
Okay, Paul, number 4.
Number 4 is Caves of Androzani. One of the later and last great stories of the original run, I would say, is Peter Davison's farewell story. And that, again, has got a fantastic Robert Holmes script. I mean, you can't really go far wrong when you've got Robert Holmes writing a Doctor Who story. You've got Graham Harper directing for the first time. He brings a new energy and cinematic feel to it. It makes it rattle along. It's a great script anyway, with great characters. And the only thing that lets it down, of course, is that magma dragon thing that appears in the first episode. But luckily, we don't see too much of that. There's always something in every Doctor Who story that visually, but the whole point of Doctor Who is you look behind that and just look at the story. But I think it's a really good, sensible, mature script. And I think it's probably the very best regeneration story, I think. And you sort of, obviously we as fans knew it was coming, but you can feel that sort of doomy atmosphere. The music is very atmospheric. I think it's Roger Lim who did the electronic music, and it's got that sort of clanging, sonorous sort of chamber sort of music type feel to it. So you know that something terrible is happening, and the whole story moves towards it. And you've got a great villain, Mashara's Jack. It's the sort of Phantom of the Opera type thing again. But it's just played so well, and it's so atmospheric, and it's something Shakespearean about the huge range of the melodrama. And the last episode itself is fantastic, of course, when the regeneration comes along. And it's a fitting end to a Doctor Who wasn't as good as he should have been. I think Peter Davison was poorly served in some ways, but it was a hell of a story to go out on. It's one, and like I said, I would say it's probably the last really great classic Doctor Who story.
Going back probably a decade now, I actually saw it at the cinema.
Oh wow!
And that was an experience. And
Yeah.
Nicola Bryant was there, Graham Harper, and Maurice Reeves.
Oh right.
And they did a bit of a question and answer thing. But it's a tremendous story, and for me, it's one of the best.
Yeah.
And Peter Davison's acting in that is really top notch as well.
Well, I think that's the thing. When he had good material, you could see it here and there during the series. You could see how good he could be. But you could tell he was really relishing this because it made the character stronger, and it was a performance that I think he wished he'd be able to give all the way through his run, but it just didn't happen often enough because the material wasn't good enough a lot of the time. But he really shone in this, and it was, I say, which is why it's such a good story for him to go out on, because it brings out the best in him. And you do think, if only there was a guarantee he could be like this for another season, you'd have liked him to have stayed on for another year, because there's so much in that portrayal in that story. But unfortunately, at the time, the writing was so up and down, the production was so up and down. It was so variable from story. Because if you think the story we had next, Colin Baker's first story, like a totally different series. You'd had none of that sort of adult feel to it. It was just a pantomime again. But that was the problem with Doctor Who back then. It was so up and down. But yeah, Caves is a terrific story in itself.
I've met Graham Harper quite a few times actually, and he told me once that the actual first choice for Sharaz Jek was David Bowie.
Oh yes, that's right. I think I've heard that. Yeah, and I think he was interested in doing it, but he couldn't fit it into a schedule or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, he was. I think he was on tour or something, which would have been.
That's right. Yeah.
Let's Dance or Tonight tour or something. And I think they asked Roger Daltrey as well.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, great story. Number 3.
Number 3 is Horror of Fang Rock.
My very first one.
We are a rodent scout. We are specially trained in the new metamorphosis techniques.
Really? The very first one you saw? Wow.
Well, the one furthest back that I can remember, I was possibly watching it before then, but that's the first one I remember watching.
I think that's again, and in a way, this refers to things like Alien, where you've got people trapped in an enclosed environment with something horrible outside coming in to get them. And I just, I like the sort of lighthouse thing anyway. I think that's quite a creepy sort of location for a story. And I think, again, it's a great script by Terence Dicks. I think the characters are really good. It's all very florid with the characters, their behaviour. You've got all these people who crash on the island. You've got the people of the lighthouse keepers. It's all turn of the century, in early 20th century. And you've got that sort of just slightly after the Victorian era feel of it, which Doctor Who always did so well. But it's just, again, another nice, simple little story. People trapped in a lighthouse, some space has crashed nearby. And I like the fact that it is for once something properly alien. It's not a man in a suit, it's a big green blob. And I think it looks quite effective, the scene of it sort of slithering up the stairs. It looks nasty and horrible. And I think it's a really nicely done story. And I think it's one of the last, again, one of the last great Tom Baker stories, because during this season, his performance starts to drift into parody a little bit. I think once Graham Williams took over as producer, he started having a bit too much influence on the character, and he started to bring his comedy into it. But I think he's close to his best in this, because he's quite ruthless. People die, and he sort of brushes them aside because he has to get to the alien to stop the alien, and people dying all over the place. It's quite a dark story, because the only people who survive are the Doctor and Leela. Everybody else dies, but that's what happened to Doctor Who. And I just think it's a really well done little story. I think it's really, some of the visuals again are a bit but that goes with the territory for Doctor Who. But it's the story that matters, and it's just a great one. That's one I can watch anytime.
It was, I mean, a lot of people forget this in the context of today, but if you think back to the 1970s, that really, for a 4-year-old like I was, or a young kid, it really was quite scary for tea time viewing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The whole episode was quite claustrophobic.
Yeah.
And
one of the things I remember about it being shown, I can remember it was September 1977, and on the day of the first episode, I had to attend my cousin from France. She was getting married, and I went to this wedding with my family. And of course, this was before video recorders and DVD players and things. If you didn't see it, you missed it. And I had to insist that my father drove me all the way back so I could watch Doctor Who. Then he went back, and then he came back and picked me up again later. It was about 5 miles away. It wasn't a massive journey. But I was absolutely not going to miss Doctor Who. And that's a memory I sort of remember. It's stuck in my head. The lengths you go to avoid missing Doctor Who when it wasn't on your shelf and you couldn't just record it.
I'm still grumpy now, even if the programme goes downhill a bit and I know it's recorded. I still like to watch it as it goes out.
I'm like that. I like to watch it when it's on. I mean, there was a period when it came back, because I was working in the evenings then as a disc jockey, so very often I'd miss it on Saturday night, and I'd be working, doing my disc, oh, Doctor Who's on now, I can't believe I'm missing Doctor. I've waited this long for it to come back. I can't see it. So if I had a weekend where I didn't have a disc, I was, oh great, I can see Doctor Who live. But even now, there's something about watching it when it's on. It's that sort of trace memory sort of thing that goes back to when you were a kid, when you had to sit and watch it when it was on.
Going back to that, you just brought up, when it first came back, there's a bit of a zeitgeist moment where everyone was into it again.
Yeah. And
I remember there was a report in the paper of someone was in a car crash and they had to cut this guy out, and he said to the police straight away, have you got a phone? Have you got a phone? He grabbed it, asked his wife if she was recording Doctor Who.
Yeah, I know. There was that period of about 2 or 3 years when it was like the big thing, wasn't it, when it came back? And sort of everybody was talking about it and everybody watched it and nobody would miss it. And I miss those days, but it was always going to be, it was always going to fade away again into the background. Because it does, it's what happens. But I suppose we're lucky, whether you like it or not now, we're lucky that it's still on, it's still going. And I like the last series, so I'm not complaining too much at the moment. It's doing things that I quite like, so I've got no particular problems with it.
Same here, as you know, I really enjoyed it. Going back to the classic series, pick number 2.
Well, it's difficult to pick between number 2 and number 1 because I love both of these stories for different reasons. And if you ask me tomorrow, I'd probably swap them around. But today I'm going to put number 2, Seeds of Doom.
What is it, Krynon?
I suppose you would call it a galactic weed. It's as if he's turning into some sort of a hideous monster.
Oh.
Which again is another great. I see. I think you approve of my choices. I'm glad about that.
Yeah.
I avoided the obvious ones like Genesis, the Daleks, and Pyramids of Mars. Not because I don't like them. It's because I think that they're so well known that you almost don't have to think about watching them because they'll replay them in your head. But Seeds of Doom for me, again, it's another great adventure story. Again, it's Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen. I mean, what a combination in this fantastic, very, very ITC sort of story about killer plants in the English countryside. This alien pod. It's got a bit of everything. It's got a bit of Avengers. It's got a bit of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, a bit of Day of the Triffids. It's a mixture of all those great British science fiction horror tropes in this fantastic story with a great script, a brilliant villain, Harrison Chase. Just again another great simple adventure story, a bit like the Sea Devils, and it just gets on with it. You've got the 2-part prologue in Antarctica where this pod is discovered by this base, then it shifts over to England. And it just doesn't stop. It's just so well done. It's Tom Baker again at his best, a real steal in his performance when he's taking it seriously. And it's just faultless. I think the effects are really good, so I can't complain about them this time. And it's just some really good adult stuff in it. All the stuff with the Crusher, with the thought of the Doctor being crushed in this composting machine, and Keeler being turned into the pod. You see the transformation of him turning into a crinoid. There's just so much in it. It's just such a visual story. 6 episodes, and it's a 6-episode story that doesn't drag either. Because a lot of them do. You think, oh, this is padding. But this just rolls along. It's just terrific stuff.
I think over time it has become my favourite out of the classic series. I mean, I've got a lot of fondness for things like the 5 Doctors and the 3 Doctors. I love those multi-Doctor adventures. But I think as a sort of archetypal Doctor Who story, a perfect Doctor Who story, it's got to be the Seeds of Doom. And it quite obviously wears its influences on its sleeves. Like you said, the Avengers, the Man-Eater of Surrey Green, the Avengers episode, Day of the Triffids, Thing from Another World. I think it borrows quite a bit from that as well.
Oh, yeah.
The
Definitely
Thing,
the first kind of episodes,
but everyone in that serial is on top of the game. Tom Baker's brilliant. There's a few sort of action scenes. He's got his funny one-liners. Elizabeth Sladen's fantastic in it. Harrison Chase is one of the great Doctor Who villains.
Oh, he's brilliant. I mean, I remember that classic scene where he's playing that organ thing, and he just turns on and says, a classic line, "I could play all day in my green cathedral." What a great line for a villain to come up with. And that's taken straight from like the Avengers or Department S, one of those shows.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
It's clearly influenced by that sort of thing. It's just, in fact, I want to go and watch it now, so hurry up. It's just a fantastic story. Love it.
And of course,
Love it.
Boise.
Yeah, of course. An early appearance by Boise.
John Challis.
Yeah, that's right.
It's got everything. So here we go. Paul Mount's all-time #1 classic Doctor Who story.
Time Lash. No, I'm joking, of course. It's, I think, on balance, it's going to be Inferno from John Pertwee's first season.
Fantastic.
Look, your name is Lethbridge Stewart.
Yes?
Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart.
Brigade leader.
All right, brigade leader. Have it your own way. And you are Elizabeth Shaw.
How did you know my name?
Because I love that whole first John Pertwee season because it's just so different. It's Doctor Who reinventing himself in the 70s as a Quatermass type series, very consciously trying to be a bit more adult and do slightly more mature stories that didn't just involve robots and, you know, aliens running around everywhere. And I just love the whole feel of it, this sort of, the idea of the alternative Earths, this threat of the Earth with this drill thing, with Operation Inferno, trying to find this new source of power, but the Doctor knows how dangerous that can be. And it's got a really good atmosphere, that sort of sense of foreboding about it, because it's set in this huge factory drilling complex, and there's this sort of throbbing sound of this drill in the background all the time. And you're conscious of this, something's going on, and you know something's going to happen. And the end of episode, I think it's episode 5 or episode 6, where he's on the alternative Earth, and he gets back to proper Earth, and the lava comes flooding in, or you see back projection of the lava flooding in. I remember that terrifying me at the time. You know, one of those things, as a kid, you're fascinated by volcanoes and earthquakes and stuff, and these great walls of lava coming towards this shed where the Doctor was hiding with his friends in there. Just terrified me as a kid. And I just love the whole build-up of, is the world going to crack apart because of this drilling? And the Prime Mods look a bit silly because they're sort of werewolfy, but they're quite effective. That sort of, they give them the sort of electronic sort of growls. They're not just growling, something electronic about it because their bodies are changing. And again, you've got a great character in Professor Stahlman, played by Olaf Pooley, who's a scientist who's not exactly evil, but he's just obsessed with this project and he wants to see it through at any cost. And Nicholas Courtney is the brigadier and brigade leader, having a great time with his eye patch. And there's just so much in it. And again, lots of great action scenes. John Pertwee is obviously still quite new to the role, but again, he's got that flamboyant sort of thing that lights up the screen. He's just something about him that he's the Doctor, and it's just a great story in itself. Again, and again, it's another one I can watch, even though it's 7 episodes. And again, I think it's a 7-episode story. There were a few 7-episode stories in his first season, and they did drag a little bit, but this one never drags for me. It's like I can always watch the next one and watch the next one because there's just so much going on. And I think because of that, because it is very adult, and I think it's probably the most Quatermass of the Quatermass runs in that series, and I just think it's the closest Doctor's ever been to being a proper adult science fiction series. And I think it's a shame then that the next season they dialed it down a bit. You can see it becoming a bit more family friendly or children friendly with Joe Grant, and a lot more cartoony and bright colours and things. But season 7 is quite dark all the way through, and it's more thought provoking. And I just think Inferno is the best example of that.
I think
So,
season 7 and stuff, particularly Inferno, stands up, you know, amongst the best of British science fiction.
Yeah, I think so.
The whole parallel world stuff and the sort of fascistic dystopian 1984 world. I mean, it did feel threatening when you watched that as a kid.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, there were quite a few scenes in sort of like the early Pertwee series that really were quite adult and mature.
Oh yeah.
I was talking to someone the other day about the Silurians. That scene where Jeffrey Palmer collapses with the virus.
Oh yeah.
You look at that, you know, it stands up to Survivors or Threads or any of those Doomwatch.
Yeah. Well, there are scenes later on of people collapsing in the street and at the railway station and things. Obviously, quite small scale stuff, but you see the effect of that sort of thing happening, and it's quite. I think the kids were still watching it. Must have been quite scared by it. The thought of this sort of disease that could wipe out mankind, especially now when we're living in a time when that hasn't happened exactly, but there's been that sort of pandemic thing. It sort of hits home, how close to home some of these things are.
Paul, what can I say? They're absolutely fantastic choices. You haven't let me down with any of
Thank
those. You did worry me a bit with Time Lash.
I know. I just thought I'd throw a curveball in there. But I didn't really think anybody would believe that.
And hopefully we'll get you back on to do your top 5 new Who stories.
Whoa. Well, that's going to be obviously something between 2005 and 2010 for me, because
controversial.
Yeah, well, is it though? Is it? I don't think it really is. I don't think so.
Mr. Paul Mount of Starburst Magazine, thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Thanks for joining us on Geeky Sci Fi TV.